everyone. Welcome to another SNEV special talk. Now, today, we have a different talk. The first, I think, in the history of SNEV. And yeah, we move it from science to mental health science because it's necessary in these days, And for today, we have a great speaker. She is Mayya Sundukova. Is Dragon Mental Health Ambassador. Is neurobiologist with 12 years of lab research experience in International Institute, now resident fellow at the Open Life Science. Mayya undertakes master thesis in narrative therapy and community work in Spain and leads a virtual community project within the Research Mental Health Observatory Remo Cost Network. She combines coaching and mentoring work, community engagement, and learning policies skills to make the research environment more human and research more responsible. So Mayya will start the presentation, and then we have a question and answer session moderated by another SNEP ECM member, Sawatama. Okay, so welcome, Mayya, to SNEP.
Oh, thanks a lot for inviting to give a talk, and thanks to everyone for choosing to spend this hour in this meeting. So I'm connecting from Spain. It's a small coastal town, and it's 9 a.m., which is considered early here because almost all shops open at 10. I'm really glad that we'll have a moderator to guide the discussion. In any case, I've prepared a document, like online document that can be edited in a collaborative way and also anonymous way. I can share the screen for you to show. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah. So it's a document that is basically there, a text file that allows you, for example, to type a questions or comments that you would like to discuss, and maybe add resources if you know something. And there is a lot of information on how to connect to Dragonfly, various channels, and also a link to the survey that I will remind you at the end of the talk to give your feedback. And the reason why we do this in this document is to provide you, if you want to be anonymous in asking questions, or also for us to gather questions in one document, so then we can prepare better for the next talk. Okay, I'll go with the presentation. I guess it's loading. Can someone give me thumbs to see? Okay, you can see it, right? Great.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Today we'll be talking about the basics of burnout, about causes and remedies, spoken, tailored to the scientific environment. And well, first I'd like to say that Dragonfly Mental Health is not a healthcare provider. So this information is not a medical advice or diagnosis, and will not substitute like talking to the medical professionals. It's more rather than kind of educational activity. And we know that you are all in different countries, and we are not able to provide links to helplines within your countries, but as a general guidance, if you're in crisis and need help, the Samaritans.org usually is a reliable source for searching help if you're in a crisis. So today's talk has basically 4 parts. So I was already introduced by Cristobal, thanks a lot. So then I'll speak a bit about Dragonfly Mental Health. Then there will be a part about the basics of burnout from a peer perspective. I'd like to comment that what is a peer perspective? It means I'm not giving it this talk from a position of an expert. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a clinical or social psychologist. I'm a scientist with some interest in advocacy about mental health. We'll focus on what helps with burnout, and then we'll have, I hope, a vibrant and active discussion among us. I already shared in the chat the link to this virtual space for questions. I assume there are people still joining, so I'll put again in the document. And Maimona writes that, yeah, you can type questions in the chat box as well. Then we can just, for our purposes, copy it in our document to make sure that we address them, and review. Yeah, I've been already introduced. So a couple of words about Dragonfly Mental Health. It's a non-profit organization that has been founded during pandemics in April 2020. So hitting 3 years now. And it's founded by academics for academics. And currently the number of volunteers is, I think, yeah, hitting over 300 of scientists from all over the world, around 45 to 50 countries. And basically 3 pillars of activities of Dragonfly Mental Health is education, community building, and research. And education can be provided as, for example, as this type of talks, or customized on-campus programs that can be focusing on some set of skills training or anti-stigma strategy and support, also towards kind of comprehensive a couple of years long programs. In terms of community, also like through these talks, we foster, space to talk about things related to mental health of academics. And there is a regular Dragonfly Cafe networking. I'm hearing some noise. Can I ask please to mute the microphone? So yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it's an excellent entry point to join this cafe, to know people who might also be interested in mental health or just, doing research in more human conditions. And also, speaking of research, because it's a global organization made by scientists, there is also a line of research to trying to understand better the scope of activities, causes and solutions for the problems. And this slide shows you just a couple of universities with whom Dragonfly Mental Health was giving programs. The statistics is always growing up, and it's more than hundreds of programs have been delivered. And they are measured, measured through surveys before and after, for example, in case of mental health literacy, which is really easy to measure, not the improvement. And overall, more than 20,000 academics have been reached. One example shown here, the skills training workshop, where 98% of participants felt more prepared. And one of the, again, activities of Dragonfly Mental Health is to work on reducing the stigma through guided showing of films about anti-stigma that has more than 2,000 viewings in 16 countries. So now we can move to the topic of today on the burnout. And first, I'd like to show you some core components of signs or symptoms. I think I'm using a bit of wrong slides. Can you excuse me for a second? Suddenly discovered that there are slides missing in my presentation. Better to speak. Restarting. So we want to speak about mental health as a continuum of states, as a spectrum of states, and one of them, the states, is mental health, the well-being, you know, our optimal state. However, we all know that stressful events happen. You know what just happened right now, what happens, you know, in our life, at our work, unexpected or expected. We're all supposed, you know, we know how to deal with it, and we can easily bounce to kind of state of well-being again. However, there are occasions in which prolonged stress or traumatic events can put us in a state of a deeper feeling of unwellness that is called distress. A worse situation is already called disorder or disease, and this is already something clinically relevant that that has usually, you know, no one out to diagnose as a disease. A friend cannot say, oh, you have this disease. Usually you go to the doctor, and the doctor, using the DSM-5, which is Diagnostical Statistical Manual 5 version, or using a defined set of criteria, will assess if it's a disorder or not. And the worst possible state that one can find is called crisis. It's an urgent situation which you need to seek immediate help of a specialist to help you to prevent from doing something bad happening. And the thing is that all of us at a certain point in life can find in any of these states, and there is nothing bad about it. It's not our fault. But of course, what we always want to have is like to foster the mental health state. And burnout, where is burnout in this scale? Well, it is between distress and disease. So it's not a disorder, and there's currently a quite hot debate discussing whether it is can be conceptualized as disorder or not. And so far, we don't have a definite answer for that. So our environment, that is academic, scientific environment, is quite unique if you compare it to other workplaces. Well, first, wherever we are studying, working, moving to industries, still, it's not on the agenda of organizations to target people in the wellness programs, to have wellness programs, to care about well-being. And then there are certain cultural and systemic barriers within academic hierarchical system that make scientists less likely to seek support, again, because of the stigma. And then the whole career structure that, you know, this extended postgraduate education, being a postdoc, tenure track until you become, you know, a fully permanent. All this career path comes with very unique pressures and cultures that are derived from the academic environment. And sometimes it's difficult even to explain to a person outside, like, why you're particularly stressed about certain things. So burnout, as I mentioned, is not a disease. It's defined by World Health Organization as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And it has three components: the feeling of high energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's jobs or feelings. So it's also called like negativism or cynicism related to his own job. I'm sorry, I think I'm hearing some noise. It's a bit distracting. Can I ask please to mute? Thank you. And as a result of the third component is the reduced professional efficacy, being not efficient and in the work. The burnout was coined around 50 years ago, and of course we can imagine, as you're a scientist, that it had a lot of development. And while originally described in people who were kind of facing human services, in tough conditions like drug abuse, people. Now we know that anyone doing a goal-directed activity can be subjected to the risk of burnout. You can think of volunteering, students, athletes, parents, caregivers, again, people who do people work, clinicians. We will know after pandemics that the medical doctors suffered a lot, and also like all the nurses. So now we're going to touch some components, the symptoms of the burnout. And the first group of symptom signs is related to how one sees each other, once you do some self-reflection. And the first and the most important is that you feel very extremely tired emotionally or physically. And it's something that doesn't pass if you have a good sleep or have a nice weekend. Another warning sign is reduced emotional regulation, when something that was previously used to be okay for you suddenly makes you really off limits. Another sign is a cognitive impairment or reduced memory or attention, and we that work a lot with our minds, you can notice now whenever it suddenly becomes really difficult to if you're trying to read a paper and it doesn't stick and you have to read it again and again, or you have difficulty in writing or following a seminar or something similar. And last and not least is sleeping problems. It can be either way, but it's something that one can really notice in their own life. And second part of the science would come from the environment, from the social environment, like from interactions with other people. And one can notice being more irritable than usual, or seeking withdrawal and distancing from the team, from the group of people with whom you used to interact at the workplace. Also reduced performance at work. That is also noticed by other people, feeling rigid, feeling inflexible with other people and in relation to tasks. And also very important, like feeling cynicism, losing the empathy to others or like to work. And the thing is that burnout is situational. There was a kind of a fight between clinical psychologists and social psychologists. Well, clinical psychologists were mostly, exploring, oh, well, it's the individual reaction to the stress. But the thing is that social psychologists really support the idea that it's related to the workplace, to the situation there. And reasons that support it is that burnout is usually in one dimension. It's usually work-related. Well, it's defined as a workplace, as occupational syndrome, and not in others. Like in your life, in your family life, in your hobbies, can be completely fine. And then many people are able to contain and manage symptoms, and they often refer to high-functioning people. And unfortunately, the situation doesn't help much to treat burnout or to prevent it, because there's a misconception, especially from some people that, well, it's non-lethal, you're doing fine physically. Well, you can just learn to live it. And with this, it can really become chronic, long, as every day may be different. And thing is that burnout is not something static that comes and stays. And it's also difficult to completely avoid it in the course of our lives that are becoming always and always more busy. Now we'll talk a bit about causes, or we can call it maybe predictors. And one of the main predictors is a chronic stress that is related to work or some work-related activities. Usually also the lack of control at your workplace over your work activity is a strong predictor of burning out, because yeah, when you, for example, you don't have enough authority or agency or power to manage the task, is not going to help you to, in the long term, to be productive and happy and value aligned. Not to mention, if your work environment is toxic and there's bullying going on, this is a strong predictor for developing burnout. Difficulty in maintaining the work-life boundaries, the imbalance, you know, all work and no play, is definitely something that is harmful to the mental health. And I already mentioned values, but when you do the work in a place or organization where your personal values do not align with the organizational values, with the group values, it's really difficult to maintain this tension. And also sometimes we can have episodes in our life where we suddenly feel disconnected from our values in some way. This can be a predictor. And then there is something strong that we see a lot in scientists and researchers, that we so often identify with our work, with our identity as a professional, as a scientist, that sometimes it's difficult to imagine who we are if we are not at bench, if we are not doing this type of work. And therefore, it's so important to have a multitude of activities, to have a hobby, to have other identity beyond work, so you can have more stability in this sense. And so the overall problem of the burnout, that it comes in a vicious circle, where one of the cause create the symptoms, and the symptom then deteriorate further the causes and worsen the situation, and the situation makes, we find you're less happy with your work and less productivity. And again, so we can think maybe of an example, you know, if to make it a bit clear, if starting from exhaustion part, like if at certain point we are finding ourselves exhausted or tired in our work. It can be, for example, you are trying to hit deadlines and overworking to make sure you deliver that paper in time. And what we are going to see, once you are really exhausted, you can be emotionally blunt and cynical about your work, feeling, well, whatever you do, you know, it's still publishing and perishing. And, you know, there is really a lot of cynicism towards the whole publishing thing and productivity. And it can cause ourselves to withdraw from the group of people, or to be more isolated or alone. And that doesn't help, because then while you're alone and ruminating your negative thoughts, you can gradually lose concentration and become more absent-minded. And in relation to, you know, the tiredness and exhaustion you already had, it can result in that you are inefficient at your workplace. That can be, you know, noticed by the supervisor. And then while we're trying to, instead of taking a vacation, we're trying to work even longer hours to cover up for that, and even become more tired. And the whole thing repeats in various shades. What can we do to break it? Before going to that, to what helps, I'd like to show you some data from surveys run by Gallup, which is probably the biggest consulting and research firm on related to the workplace. Well, it says it investigated the employee work-related burnout by asking more than 12,000 respondents. It was still before pandemics, so we can consider it. And half said they did it sometimes, and 7% said they always feel burned out at work. So 76%, if we sum, of employees experience burnout on the job at least sometimes. This is these numbers are worrying because they're very high, and this relates something to our culture nowadays of work. And what are the consequences of feeling burnout, of having burnout? I think my slides are a bit slow. Stay with me. Well, the data shows that there is more 63% chance of taking a sick day because of burnout. Indeed, the absenteeism is a great economic burden for the firms, for the organizations, because people cannot work because of the burnout. There is 23% more likely to visit the emergency rooms because of the health complications, and 50% less likely to discuss with manager about performance. Of course, we don't know the details, if it's what's the tone of those discussions, but still. And 2.6 times as likely to be seeking another job. We can imagine now if there is some toxic environment. And 70% less likely to experience burnout if you just give people enough time to manage their task, enough time to take vacations and days off as necessary. The pandemics, of course, raised the burnout to a new, completely new level of awareness. Someone wanted to say something, or was it just random noise? Okay, I suppose it's random noise. So the survey of US scientists showed that 69% felt stressed, 68% felt fatigued, and 35% felt angry. Well, I can relate to anger is something, you know, is a motivator in this sense, is the contra. And 50% said they were seriously considering changing their career or retiring early, to show how pandemics exacerbated the problems that scientists were having in their cultures. And for junior scientists, the crisis magnifying stress is already present. And we all know that the career uncertainty is rampant, is just as it was never before. Well, we've talked a lot now about the definition, about science, about predictors, about the cycle. But now let's turn to speak about what is helpful actually. And what helps is actually speaking about it, you know, like we're doing today, we are giving a talk about burnout from peer perspective. And what we aim is to change the culture, to be able to speak about the stress, to be able to manage stress, to share the tips on how to handle it and change the culture of toxic productivity. To seek social support, not to think about it all as self-care, but rather than think of community care, creating a safety network of friends, of colleagues that would be able to, you know, to help others recognize when something is going wrong, and contrast this withdrawal and distancing that is observed in burnout. And it's really important to balance rest and effort. I will just, you know, this all looks like advices from your grandmother, but this is really scientifically proven that taking complete vacations is helpful. Committing to regular breaks, like not working too much without having breaks. For example, a Pomodoro technique, when you work in 25 minutes and taking a 5-minute break, or even for every 50 minutes of work, then you take a 10 minutes break of really necessary, efficient, and joyful activity. I hope after this talk we can have some minutes for you to take this break before going into next activities. And remember, you have to take care of your body, to eat well, to drink, to go into the restroom when you want, and this will help you to make sure how to organize your work-related activities in a way that is efficient. Think of working smart and not working hard only. And think of joy, think of the moments of the breaks as a way that you can do something nice, because it's true that our life is stressful, but we need to nurture these moments of joy and relax and pleasure. And improving basic health actually helps, and we can name mindfulness, that was shown to be very important in putting your attention from whatever rumination you have to the present moment, to what I am feeling, what is around. To make sure you have sleep, your good sleep is really a priority in our types of careers. Exercising, being able to exercise regularly is really helpful. And then it's not here on the slide, but there's more and more scientific evidence that nutrition is really helpful in any kind of mental health activities, because, for example, what is called standard American diet is really boosting the inflammation in the brain and is not helpful in feeling good. And finally, once you are feeling more recovered, one can really try to improve the work communication, like at the workplace, and negotiate, for example, better working hours. If your supervisor is really pushing you towards some type of working hours and maybe need some accommodations, it's important to talk about it, to be assertive. And Dragonfly Mental Health has also a talk that is called Managing Upwards, that is also available. We can maybe talk later about it. And yeah, we're having the pizza type of advices and practices. If I want to finish with some other bits of advice, it's important that the burnout is not like internal failure. It's important to externalize it and recognize that it's a consequence of the system that is not very human, that expects people to work long hours, to sacrifice their personal lives. And that's why it's important to work on systemic things, but also to find ways to detach yourself from stress, to normalize conversations around mental health in your environment, to fight the isolations that we are feeling sometimes. And as one of the Dragonfly Mental Health volunteers said, treat yourself like a tree. What a tree needs to feel good: sun, water, air, nutrients, the grounding, the space. And I would add also other trees and other species, like, I don't know, birds and insects. So kind of fitting it in the ecological way. I'd like to, in the final couple of slides, to remind that burnout is work-related. It has the symptoms that relate to exhaustion, reduced adaptability, feeling cynicism about work and colleagues, the reduced performance and concentration, and the predictors are having a lot of chronic stress related to work, where you don't have enough control on all the tasks, amount, or deadlines, bullying or toxic work environment, and also imbalancing work and life. And we have a couple of slides on mood disorders and anxiety. It's not oops, the key again is stuck, is not was the main issue for this presentation. These slides are really stuck. Let me try to move to the key thing here. But the message is that we know there are some mood disorders, such as, for example, depression or related anxiety, but also depression can be characterized as, feeling extremely exhausted or cynical. But there was a discussion if these things actually overlap, burnout, depression, anxiety. But the most recent analysis shows that they're distinct constructs, not overlapping. However, one can, have burnout that will trigger depression. And the difference here is that the burnout is completely work-related. And while depression is maybe more generalized. And I like to remind you that the burnout is not a disease, not a disorder, while depression is something that is in the DSM, in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And it's important for those who are at high risk to be screened for both burnout and clinical symptoms of depression and anxiety. But this is something that the medical professional will be doing. So for now, it's just important to know that there are ways that they're different and not mixed up. We are actually at the end of the talk. And as I mentioned, we're having a short survey with the feedback, but I suggest I'll remind you later about it. And yeah, we'll then move to the reading the chat questions or this document that I shared with you. So yeah, that was enough of me talking for 40 minutes.
All right,
so to talk to you.
I love the talk, Mayya, and I think I speak on behalf of everyone who's attended the meeting that it was a very illuminating one, because we all do feel a lot of situations where we might not realize that we're burnt out, and these are all these checkpoints that we need to actually look through. So before I get into the question answer, I'd also like to thank the organization for sponsoring today's talk. We're really grateful for that. And okay, so moving on to the chat questions. There's one question about burnout symptoms sounding similar to depression. So what really are the differences between the two, and how do you identify whether he was burnt out or maybe depressed?
Yeah, it's something I mentioned at the end of the presentation, that in principle, it's up to the doctor to figure it out through, certain